All right, we're going to talk about this newfound love from U.S. for football. Patrick Rishe is the founder of Sportsimpacts, a markets research firm that specializes in sports. He's also a professor of economics at Webster University. He joins me now from Los Angeles. Hello, sir. How are you, Professor?
Good.
Chris was talking about how football has advanced. Now, I remember back in the day when people didn't even know what football was, but when we hosted the World Cup, there was excitement then, and that's kind of the beginning of building up. How big of an impact has that had on the economy? Let's talk about this World Cup in particular.
I think there's been a bigger impact on youth soccer and the progression of where U.S. soccer is in terms of world football compared to the impact on the economy. Certainly, you'll see impact at local restaurants. Certainly, folks spend money on U.S. soccer merchandise. But for those positives, you also see a lot of people taking time away from work. So you could see some lost worker productivity for those reasons as well.
I saw one interesting stat I was reading about this, how in the last World Cup game, U.S. workers lost somehow $150 million in just productivity. But that can be countered, right? The sales of jerseys and all these things that are generally fans that they want to buy and they want to participate. You can't put a price tag on sort of worker morale, right?
That is one positive argument that's made, is that even though some folks may be spending time not at their desk watching the matches together, employers perhaps could be creative and have some team building events at their workplace and have people get together early in the morning for breakfast or for a late lunch, as the case may be tomorrow, to watch the game. And again, team building and unity at work, building team morale, is something that could benefit worker productivity going forward.
I found myself in the last game with Greece rooting for Greece, not just because I wanted a good game, but also because the economy has had such a tough last few years that you kind of want some of these underdog economies to do well, because you see fans happy and smiling. It's not something that you typically see when you talk about some of these big economies. Is there going to be a longer-term impact for some of these teams, even if they get knocked out somehow during the tournament, but they had a good tournament? Is there a long-term positive impact?
I'd love to say that there is, but I'd have to agree with the economist that you had on during the segment. It's really a short-term effect. Again, it could boost morale, certainly in Costa Rica, for example, and obviously Brazil, where there's huge income inequality. It makes their people, nothing makes them happier than to see their team progress through the tournament. But even if the Brazilians win the World Cup, even if the Costa Ricans win the World Cup, it doesn't resolve some of the internal equity issues. It doesn't help redistribute money to the poor, where a lot of these countries are having problems. So yes, it makes people feel good in the short run, but unfortunately doesn't serve their long-term problems.
In the United States, ABC has the rights, along with ESPN, of course, the big sports network, to broadcast the games. And the last I checked, the viewership was more than that of the Super Bowl, the Winter Olympics, combined, essentially. I mean, this is huge. I don't know if that was predicted by the media pundits, but who are ultimately the main beneficiaries of sort of all these folks watching television?
Well, certainly the sponsors that put forth the dollars for these events, and they're spending anywhere, obviously the Cokes of the world, some of the other sponsors spending anywhere from $10 to $30 million annually for sponsorship with FIFA and the World Cup. They did not anticipate, as you mentioned, Philip, these ratings. So they're getting more than their money's worth. And again, I think that with the United States advancing out of the group of death, something that I believe most people did not expect them to do, it's given U.S. soccer more credibility and more momentum. So even if we lose tomorrow, I think it's going to create a lot of additional momentum going forward, both for sponsors of the sport and also for youth soccer.
All right, now how about the fans and small businesses? Because the last World Cup game for the U.S., just here in the D.C. area, there was a bit of a party happening at a park in DuPont Circle where thousands and thousands just turned out to come watch the game on big outdoor screens. I imagine there's going to be a positive impact, at least to the bars and businesses that surround some of these venues. I mean, all of them are now going to have these World Cup parties, right?
No question. In fact, tomorrow I can assure you that I will probably be watching the game from home after my summer class, because I know that I will not be able to get to the bar in time to get a good seat. So there's no question that these kinds of events, and it mimics what you see whenever a city hosts, if it's a Super Bowl, a Final Four, even a regional, the Stanley Cup, NBA playoffs. Obviously, the restaurants close to the arenas get a lot of additional business, and during the World Cup, it's great, not only when the Americans play, certainly that's when you see the biggest spike in restaurant spending, but even these other games, the World Cup has really captured the attention of the American sports fan, and it's helped American restaurants.
You know, one thing that's kind of cool, and Chris mentioned it in his story, is that for the younger generation, these 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds who maybe didn't think about football, or as Americans call it, soccer, to play it when they're young. Maybe this kind of excitement drives parents to send their kids to more of these camps, and maybe there's a resurgence in the sport, at least at a very young age. Do you see that happening?
Absolutely. I think back as a young soccer player in the 80s, the only place where I could watch soccer was on PBS. And so now you look at all the places where folks can consume the sport thanks to cable television. One network has a deal with the EPL. So now young kids can watch the top level of soccer in the world very easily in their living room. And I think that gives kids the realistic hope to believe that at someday they could go abroad, play in one of the European leagues if they choose to. And of course, some of our top players who have played in the top leagues in Europe are now playing in Major League Soccer, like Clint Dempsey and Michael Bradley have come and returned home, so to speak. So all these things are positive developments for American soccer going forward.
What do you think about the odds of the U.S. perhaps hosting a future World Cup in the near future?
I think their odds are good because we have the infrastructure in place. We have the stadiums in place. You don't have to see us spend a lot of money building the facilities. Obviously, Brazil, we've talked about them spending upwards of $11 billion, a lot of that going towards stadium construction. And Philip, don't be surprised. We've seen these heat breaks, humidity breaks during the action, unprecedented because of the heat in Brazil. Well, they may rethink going to Qatar in 2022, I believe, in light of that. And also Qatar, there's been some improprieties that have come to light. I would not be surprised if perhaps the U.S. sneaks back in and gets the 2022 World Cup.
All right, we went through 8 minutes without opening up that can of worms, so thank you for that. But I want to ask you, your predictions for tomorrow's match. What's the likely outcome?
The likely outcome is Belgium winning. I have confidence, however, that the Americans are going to make a great match of it and would not be surprised if the Americans win.
All right, well, there'll be quite a few of us watching, I have a feeling. All right, Mr. Rishe, Professor Rishe, thank you very much. Good to have you on, economist professor at Webster University.